Good morning, guys. We are Group 8. Today, the topic is about the oral corrective feedback on second language writing. Two approaches compare. Our group members are Pei Ling, Wenjiao, and Haiyu. There are four main sections. I will introduce the part of background, purpose, and significance. Wenjiao will introduce the part of methodology and result. As for the conclusion, critique, and limitation, Pei Ling will demonstrate them. And the final discussion, there are questions that might help you critical thinking, and it will be discussed in our class. The first part is background, purpose, and significance. As for the background, there are three main definitions of statements. First one is about corrective feedback from cognitive interactionist theory. The cognitive interactionist theory conceptualizes corrective feedback in terms of a set of distinct strategies, which may or may not result in learners repairing their errors and which have differential effect on output learning. Corrective feedback strategy from this paradigm can be implicit or explicit, since there is a research proof that explicit feedback is better than implicit feedback. Thus, authors view the explicit correction as the main strategy of the corrective feedback. Additionally, it's about corrective feedback from the socio-cultural paradigm. The socio-cultural paradigm conceptualizes corrective feedback as a negotiated and graduated process aimed at assisting learners to self-correct. Furthermore, it's corrective feedback in language pedagogy. From a pedagogy perspective, graduated feedback is preferred, and explicit feedback is not. One expert, however, noticed that one advantage of explicit correction may be that it is the most useful and most appropriated way of helping. Thus, there is a debate about the effect of graduated feedback and explicit feedback. Two theoretical paradigms afford very different views about how corrective feedback should be carried out and how it affects learning. The purpose of the study was to compare cognitive interactionalist theories and socio-cultural theory to investigating corrective feedback by examining graduated feedback and explicit correction on student errors in oral conference following two pieces of writing. Two researcher questions will be discussed. The first one is how successful are the learners self-correct or update teachers' correction under the graduated feedback and explicit correction. The second one is what changes are provided when the graduated feedback and explicit feedback correction are implemented successfully over time. Thus, one of the values of the study is that it tried to find out the evidence of a reduction in the numbers of assistants over time in terms of the graduated feedback. In detail, it tried to find out whether the feedback is needed to help students reduce more teachers' explicit feedback and get more self-correct over time. In the next part, Wenjiao will introduce the methodology and result.
In the second part, I will briefly introduce the methodology and the result of the research. Let's get started with the method. The participants were all adult English second language learners in a New Zealand language school. Students were divided into two groups, the graduated group and the explicit group. The graduated group involved 5 males and 2 females pre-intermediate students, while the explicit groups were strong pre-intermediate students included 6 males and 2 females. Now we move on to the procedures. The participants from two groups needed to reconstruct the narratives in 2 writing tasks. In the first task, students have 20 minutes to read and take notes. Then they have 1 hour to rebuild the narrative without reading text and notes. 2 to 4 weeks later, students did the second writing task, and the procedures were the same as the first one. After 2 writing tasks, students received feedback for each one. As for the technique of data analysis, the research employed a mixed method to analyze the data. For the first research question, the researchers used the quantitative approach to count the self-correct, uptake with repair, and no resolution. For the second one, they analyzed the teacher's strategy to correct individual students in 2 groups. Our first research question is, how successful are the learners' self-correction or uptake teacher's correction under the graduated feedback and explicit correction? The quantitative analysis has shown that only 8 out of 221 graduated feedback failed to achieve self-correction. We have mentioned in the background the graduated feedback assisted self-correction, right? However, 98 out of 206, nearly 50% of the explicit feedback failed to achieve resolution. Therefore, we can conclude that the graduated feedback was successful in enabling learners to self-correct. The explicit feedback was less successful in achieving resolution. Now we turn to the second research question. Our focus here is the changes. We all know that the explicit group employed one strategy from the beginning to the end, so there is no changes. Therefore, we take a look at the graduated group here. The example shows the teacher tried to elicit self-correction in the first place. After times failed to achieve self-correct, the teacher's strategy was getting more and more explicit. So, we could see the change in terms of teacher's feedback. They changed from implicit to more explicit. The second example shows the change of the first episode to the last episode within the first writing conference. In the left column, the teacher applied explicit strategies such as mental linguistic comments. In other words, students received more assistance from the teacher. However, the right column, the second and the third episode, shows that the teacher provided feedback by indication, such as, do you see any problem? There is another problem. The teacher did not use any explicit strategies, so the students received less assistance here. Therefore, the findings of the second research question indicate that the explicitness of teachers' feedback has no systematic reduction over time, and there is a consistent reduction of teachers' assistance levels.
Now, let's move to the third part, critique and conclusion. All in all, the results of research are that graduated feedback might be considered more effective in self-correction. However, explicit feedback can be executed easily and quickly, and thus consumes much less time than graduated feedback. In a way, it's more efficient. This research is excellent. The research aim is clear, and a large number of graphs and data are used to illustrate the research results and data analysis. It's worth mentioning that, based on the research which was done by Jeffrey and Lutf in 1994, the research methods have been improved. Not only a more systematic and quantitative analysis of the feedback episodes was undertaken, but a qualitative analysis of illustrate protocols was added to make the research results more complete. But the research results are different from the previous ones. The reason is the explanation for the difference in the results probably lies in how the data were analyzed. Jeffrey and Lutf provided a microgenetic analysis of selective feedback episodes with no explanation of why these episodes had been chosen. However, the limitation of the research increased a lot due to the addition of quantitative analysis. Firstly, when the quantitative analysis is performed, the number of individuals selected is too small to obtain accurate research data. Secondly, the impact of individual differences is not considered. For example, when testing the impact of creative feedback on the use of articles, does L1 have any influence? The words should be clearly defined, which will have an impact on the final research results. Then, the differences in the difficulty of tests also make the research results controversial. For example, the use of the past tense is simpler than the use of articles. Does the difficulty of the test itself also affect the research? And in the quantitative analysis, two-group individual learners research only analyzed past tense errors, not the article errors. To improve the research, all participants should be investigated rather than only two students, and the variables should be limited to ensure the accuracy of the research. Just like what the researcher said, it's impossible to conclude which type of feedback is more effective. But we can still figure out which type of feedback is most suitable in different situations, which can make our learning and teaching more efficient. That's exactly what this research did.